Okay, welcome to Pro 221. Tonight, the focus is on, once again, business communication, but tonight is more about verbal communication, face-to-face communication, than it is any other type. You'll be creating a PowerPoint, which really is straightforward. The only thing that it does that maybe you haven't done in the past with a PowerPoint is it requires you to have some different notes. And if you just scroll to the bottom of your PowerPoint, you know that you've created any kind of template that you want, and input those notes. That should be really easy, and then submit it as an attachment um, to the discussion board, and you should be in good shape. Um, but anyway, just want to review just a few things from last week, go over a little bit of the content for this week. Just want to encourage you, of course, to finish strong. This is the last week. Congratulations. And most of you are in great shape as far as finishing the class and getting a very good grade. There are a few of you that still have the opportunity to resubmit or edit or submit additional content as far as previous discussion boards. You'll recall, as we talked about that in prior weeks, as far as late work is concerned, you do have the opportunity to turn things in. You won't get full credit, but even getting most of the credit will be enough to get probably still be in line for the grade that you were hoping for from the class, or at least to pass the class. So strongly encourage you to get caught up if you find yourself a little bit behind this week, and then finish strong and have everything in by Saturday at midnight. Now, just a quick reminder about Saturday: because it's the end of the mod, there are no extension reasons beyond Saturday at midnight. So, and not even partial credit, none of that kind of thing. I've got to have grades in by the next morning, and so there are no exceptions for this week as far as late work is concerned. There were exceptions up to this point, but now we've got to have a hard and fast deadline. So what that means is, in order to avoid the potential for something going wrong, I would just strongly encourage you to work on your work and get it behind you early this week, and just move on. As far as having it done before something could go wrong on Saturday when you're trying to last minute get it in. Okay. All right. So a couple things we want to look at. I mentioned that today we're going to do a little bit of review, a little bit of preview as far as this week's content, but mostly we want to talk about verbal communication and the importance of good verbal communication when it comes to business. And so hopefully we'll be able to effectively communicate, and I'll be able to demonstrate effective communication in trying to help us understand why communication is so important. It's a little bit difficult when you don't have anybody to interact with in a course like this. We're just recording into thin air. Don't have anybody to ask questions or to bounce ideas off of. And so it's a little bit different in this format than it is in a normal class setting where we've got interaction and where we can have participation. And that's been consistent throughout this course. It's been a little bit of a challenge for me because no matter how many people I've had in different courses in the past, it seems like at least one or two people would show up to the sessions and allow me to interact and have participation in these sessions. So this has been a new challenge for me, and hopefully you've been able to get something from these weekly sessions. So from last week, we had you create a pie chart within Excel, and then just give me some feedback on the breakdown from your interview that you had done in a previous week regarding business communication, the different forms of business communication. The interesting thing, and I mentioned this to you in a previous session, but for me personally with my business, my breakdown was a little more complicated and as far as more modes of communication. And we showed you that pie chart last week during the session, that I have quite a few different modes of communication, and a lot of mine is electronic now as far as email, but still a lot of phone calls and face-to-face meetings. And so it seems like no matter how electronic your career is, even if you're a programmer or something like that, you'll still have a portion of your day, whether it's meetings, staff meetings, phone calls with management, in-person one-on-ones with management, evaluations, things like that. At some point, no matter how secluded your job description is, most of us will have interaction with others, and most of us will need decent verbal communication skills in order to retain our job, be considered for promotion, and maybe even to get that first job that we're looking for in the career path that we're hoping to accomplish. So tonight is especially important if nothing else, to remember how important verbal communication skills are for that first interview, for that first discussion with a potential employer or HR management. Other courses really focus on making sure that that resume is practiced and polished and professional, so that you can get that first interview. But then we've still got to accomplish that interview and do a good job. And sometimes it's 4 or 5 interviews with different people. If it's a job that some of the most sought after jobs take multiple interviews with multiple people to get the position you're looking for. And so that requires you to be able to read different people. You can't just have a good interview with one person because you have like personalities. You've got to be able to roll and maneuver with different personalities that you might interview with, and be able to accomplish a decent interview verbally, face to face with somebody, or at least video conference or on the phone with somebody, sometimes multiple times, to get that job that you're hoping for. So tonight should be interesting from a standpoint of how important those verbal communication skills are. So we did that pie chart. We've got some feedback on some of the business communication methods that the folks that you guys interviewed had. And for the most part, most of your feedback was face-to-face still, as far as the careers that you interviewed. And then just a reminder, I did get grades done today. Everything to this point in the course has been graded. So if you have any questions or concerns about previous assignments or discussion boards in this class specifically, please send me a quick email and let me know. Let's be in touch early this week if you have concerns about your grades, so that you have enough time to potentially correct, if you're off course as far as the expectation that you had for the course as far as your grade is concerned. So just check the grade book early this week if you have the opportunity to, and give me some feedback if you feel like something on there is off track or that I'm missing something. And let's talk if you feel like you're off track from the goal that you had when we started this class for the grade that you wanted. There may not be a lot that we can do, especially if there's significant things missing. The biggest thing I'll tell you to do is just to get caught up first and foremost. If you're caught up and still not getting the grade you want, then let's have a discussion about what you might be able to do, or what you might be able to accomplish as far as extra effort is concerned to get the grade that you are looking for. And along that same line, just be careful not to let up on your checkpoints this week. Some people in the last week and other courses that I've taught just kind of give up on checkpoints. They become undisciplined in this last week and decide that it doesn't really matter. Remember, when we first talked about it, we talked about how if you were to accomplish the bare minimum on checkpoints, it's worth a chunk of your grade. But not only that, if you accomplish the extra checkpoints each week, which amounts to about 3 different checkpoints every week, if you accomplish those extras, you're more than a half a letter grade of potential extra credit is associated with those checkpoints. So just strongly encourage you to be disciplined about those and stay consistent with those checkpoints, even into this last week, especially if you want to give yourself a buffer, because we've got only one more score, but it's a significant enough score that if we don't get the score that we wanted on that, we may need that extra credit from the checkpoints to get the grade that we were looking for. All right, so be in touch with me. Send me a quick email if you've got any questions or concerns about grades. Get caught up with your work, resubmit, edit, do whatever you need to previous discussion boards that we've had in this class if you didn't get the grade that you wanted, and I will award some additional points for extra credit when it comes to those assignments. Of course, catch up this week is priority 1. Priority 2, though, is a fairly, what I think is a fairly interesting grouping of readings this week and website addresses, articles, I should say. One of them is a nice little podcast, nice little interview or conversation about storytelling. So you might think, what the heck does storytelling have to do with this particular business topic that we're learning about as far as communication skills are concerned, verbal communication skills? And we'll go into why storytelling is so important in just a bit. There's an interesting assessment for you to take. The assessment goes through different, just rate yourself honestly and give yourself some feedback as far as how you respond to various situations, how you communicate both from a listening and verbal talking standpoint. Might give you some feedback on how you can make improvements or what kinds of things you might feel lacking in. And then a couple other articles that basically just list out different pointers, different ways to become a better communicator. So they just give you different ideas and suggestions as far as ways that you can communicate more effectively when it comes to business and just in life in general. Um, Effective business communication parlays into every other type of communication in your life. It helps relationships. It helps all kinds of things to be able to effectively communicate and be willing to effectively communicate. Takes a little bit of effort, takes practice, takes some humility sometimes in different relationships, to communicate in a way that's respectful, that sometimes needs to be humble, um, and but also confident and clear in the feelings and expectations that you need to communicate to someone else. So all those things that you could learn from that assessment as far as feedback on your communication skills could be parlayed into any other aspect of your life, because most every aspect of our life has some form of communication that goes along with it. And then, of course, the actual instructions, how the instructions break down for this week's discussion board is that you're going to be creating a 2-page PowerPoint. I don't want one of those pages to just be the topic page or a title page of some kind. I want 2 content pages. Okay, I want 2 content pages for a PowerPoint, and I want what the book or the instructions call for as far as the instructions for the notes as well. So we want 2 pages, which is no big deal as far as the content there, but then we also want some pointers, some notes that you could give if you were giving a presentation, just a very short presentation, obviously with just 2 slides, but your notes, what you would actually say about those slides. Instead of winging it, we want you to think through how you could present the information that you're presenting. And of course, you'll find that information in the readings, like we always do this week on the discussion board. Some of those sites and articles that the links will give you is where you want to derive the information that you'll be using within the PowerPoint. Okay? If you have any questions about how to create a PowerPoint or any of the instructions for this week, just send me a quick email and I'd be happy to discuss it with you and try to point you in the right direction as far as what to do for this week. All right. So let's talk about some of the content that is for the week. So one of the most intriguing pieces of information or studies as far as the required reading for this week is a podcast, which is kind of a different format. Usually we're used to just an article. We've had a lot of Houston Chronicle articles for some reason in this class, but just kind of short, online blog article type things, just small periodical articles online. And this podcast, a little bit different format. Like I say, it's moderated by a lady, and then there's a gentleman that she's interviewing and basically talking about different skill sets for storytelling when it comes to communicating. And more specifically in the context of selling something. And most of you will, when I say that, say, well, I don't think that I'm going to be in the sales business. I'm not going to have a career in sales necessarily. And what I would tell you is that regardless of whether or not you're at a Nordstrom selling shoes or at a car lot selling cars, some of you might say there is no way I would ever be in the sales business. But I would come back with every single career that you can think of requires you to sell your skills and your talents to an employer. Okay, so you're in the business with this degree that you're getting right now of accomplishing a more intriguing resume, right, with this degree, so that you can sell your ability to help a business to a potential employer down the road, and that they'll hire you and pay you more based on the fact that you've got this new credential, this degree, along with experience and other things that will intrigue them. So landing a job, landing a career, landing a promotion is all about selling yourself in a good way, right? We're selling the skill set and the value add that we can offer to a business or to a manager or to an HR person. And sometimes some people are much better at selling their abilities than others, right? Some of us really really struggle to sell someone else on what we can do for them, the value that we can bring to a business or to just another individual through a relationship. And others of us, it's fairly easy. It's a skill that we've practiced and honed over time. We enjoy, trying to convince somebody or lend influence on somebody. But it's one of those things that I don't think anybody is born with. I think it's something that some people practice more. Some people are willing to put themselves out and practice more when it comes to selling and being confident and verbally communicating with others about what kind of value they can bring to a situation. And then others of us, really are a little more shy maybe by nature, and so we don't get nearly as much practice trying to sell not some product necessarily, but just sell ourselves, sell our talents, sell our ability to add value and bring value to a situation, whether that be a workplace or a relationship, right? So, interesting podcast about selling. And like I say, there's a selling connection to any industry that you work in. You don't need to be a saleswoman or salesman to be in the business of selling, like I say, the value that you can bring to a business. You're going to have to do that no matter what business you go into, no matter what career you have, no matter what kind of relationships you have. Relationships are built on, at least initially, someone's ability to communicate, okay, to be able to communicate verbally usually the value that they can bring to a relationship, right? So that is a very important part to relationships as well as business. Okay, so some of the important things that I derive from the podcast, I just thought we'd discuss some of these that I think are so important. One of the things that the interviewee points out during this podcast is that there usually is only a capacity for most of us to retain three things. Okay, so why does that matter? Well, it matters because sometimes we get in our zeal, okay, in our excitement to convince somebody that we're valuable, okay, or that our product is valuable, or that our skill sets are valuable, or that our relationship would be valuable, we end up, overshooting the mark and kind of overselling the situation by overwhelming whomever we're communicating with facts and figures and information. So and I think this is great information, in all forms of communication, because I think most of us don't have capacity beyond one, two, or three things. You got to have something that's memorable, that might even be just one thing that somebody can take away with, because most of us, if we just get a bunch of information, we can't retain it, and so we just end up forgetting all of it, and none of it's memorable, right? The master of the master of none type of thing. We don't focus in on anything, and so our communication ends up being watered down and ends up creating a situation where nothing that we say is memorable, even though we provided lots of good facts and figures and information for that person to consider. So limit it to three things or less. Focus in on three things or less so that somebody can leave with a couple things that they can actually remember and do something about. Because the whole point is we want them to be able to remember, retain, and do something about what it is that we're trying to sell or communicate. Okay, so three things. Limit it, limit it, limit it. Don't give them 10 things. List off 10 different things for them to do. Most of us don't keep notes. If we did, maybe 10 things would be okay. In like a class, for example, a class setting, people are conditioned to be taking notes. But in the real world, in real life, even in a sales meeting, a board meeting where people could be taking notes, they still only have capacity for one, two, maybe three things that they can take on and actually improve and do something about. We've all been in meetings, okay? I shouldn't assume that on everybody. I've been in many meetings over the years, both for, church meetings, for civic meetings, for business meetings, for, classes, where it was kind of information overload. A situation where I got so much information and so many different things, my head hurt, and I didn't come away with any one thing that I could really work on or do better at. So it's important to be focused and hone in on something that really people can really think about and they can take with them, instead of just having a jumble of information that doesn't accomplish anything. And then they talk about the old adage, facts tell and stories sell. If we're in the business of selling, okay, and as I've mentioned earlier, all of us are in the business of some kind of selling ourselves as far as a relationship is concerned, or as far as business is concerned, not necessarily products, once again. In both of those worlds, though, facts tell and stories sell. The facts are important. The facts are important as an aside, though, to the story, to whatever makes them feel something. to whatever makes them, their gut tell them this is important. Okay, we want them to have their gut telling them to influence a feeling of, I need to do something about this, right? And it's not just, fake, in the sales world, some people will talk about kind of this, how you have to create this impending doom, or, some reason to act, or some reason for, the fact that they need to hurry and do it now type of thing. Well, that can be overdone, right? None of us, I shouldn't say none of us. Once again, I don't appreciate, salespeople just being in the business of trying to make me want, feel like I have to do something that they want me to do right then. Okay, there needs to be some sort of reason and motivation, but we don't need to overplay that. We just need to make sure that we have had them feel something and have them feel motivated, in order to accomplish a sale of some kind. But stories, something that makes them feel something, are much more effective than just facts and figures. And why is that? In the podcast, it talks about something I think is very intriguing, very interesting. It talks about how they can prove, that there's actually a chemical reaction in your body that takes place when you feel something. When it's a story that kind of pulls at your heartstrings a little bit, or makes you feel differently about a situation, or feel motivated about a situation, that actually changes something in your body. And it actually is proven to change something in your body that makes you more willing to buy, or to change, or to do something different. And I think that's critical, because whenever we're trying to lend influence, and influence is only effective if somebody does something about it, right? We can lend influence. We can talk all we want as a manager, of people, right? I'm talking to my team, I'm communicating to them, I'm a great communicator, but nobody ever feels motivated to do anything afterward, then I'm highly ineffective. Okay? I want people to feel something. I want people to want to change, be motivated to do something different, and go from there. And that's something where we have to inspire, right? We have to inspire that. And the way we inspire that is to sell through stories, to lend influence through stories. So what's an example of that? The podcast gives a couple different things, that just quick examples, but we all can think back to a story that really influenced us, or at least most of us can. Books tend to have significant influence on people. They can have significant directional influence on somebody's lives because of what somebody reads and how it impacts them, or what somebody sees in a movie can have a significant impact on somebody. And so we remember these stories and these images that can change our lives. And that's what we're talking about here. It talks about how, the podcast talks about how images, when we're doing a PowerPoint, for example, which we're going to be doing here, that to focus on imagery as opposed to just words. Okay, so words have their place, they have an importance, but if all we're doing is reading slides, there's going to be very little impact, very little feeling, very little influence, beyond that communication. If there are images, if there's something that's going to stick with people, and I included music, I don't know that they did, that they talked about that in the podcast, but one movie to another, the music for me personally makes a big difference. The soundtrack, the score to a great film is usually really strong. So I think of movies like Braveheart, or movies like, even like a movie like Forrest Gump, or a movie like Glory, an older classic movie. Even a movie like Titanic, which I don't really like the movie, but the music is quite good. So there are these movies that have really good music. Even the new Star Wars has, John Williams is a wizard when it comes to music in movies, and it enhances, for me personally, the movie. And I think statistically speaking, if you look at really successful scores over the years, as far as the music associated with the movie, you'd have a movie that was successful with it. So anyway, music can have significant influence. It can help us to feel something, to be motivated in a different way than just words can. And then one of the other things that I mentioned, and one of the reasons why this course specifically has been a little bit of a challenge for me personally, is I like to question. I like to make sure that people have to answer questions, because I feel like in them answering those questions, they're they just have a significantly heightened sense of learning, or success rate at learning, I should say, because they have to think through it a little bit. If you're just presented to and you never have to think one bit about what's going on, why it's going on, it's a lot more difficult to learn and internalize what it is that you're hearing about. When you have to answer a couple questions and think through in order to answer those questions, just the exercise of doing that creates a much different learning experience, and a much more successful learning experience, usually, for somebody to internalize the information. One of the things that works for me is when I read a textbook to study for a test, which I'm doing right now. I'm studying for a significant industry test that I'm taking here in a month or two. When I read the textbook, okay, just the words, I retain some information. When I go and practice the tests and have to regurgitate that information and have to answer test questions about that information and then get it wrong sometimes, that's sometimes the very best information that I retain, is when I get a question wrong and I have to think through why I got it wrong in those practice tests that I'm able to do. Some of that information stays with me much better than just reading. Okay, and it goes back to that questioning. If we're forced to kind of question and think through things, it's much more successful than if we're just sitting back and allowing information to be heard or to be read. So we talked about the chemical reaction, and then the podcast also talks about lots of famous business leaders like Branson, Richard Branson, and how he really felt like storytelling was such a significant culture piece with Virgin, the different companies that he owns, that he built, at one of his many palatial estates, he built a very large camp pit, basically a fire pit, so that he and other executives and other business leaders could get together and just tell stories, because he felt like that was a significant, that added significant value for those leaders, which is interesting. We often will talk about kind of the water cooler, that you go and talk around. Of course, hardly any businesses have water coolers that you come together around, but there still is something to that. If businesses can get employees together, sometimes in a non-business setting, just a retreat of some kind or something, and they can kind of tell personal stories and war stories about business and success stories about business, some of those are some of the most successful takeaways that I've ever gotten as far as business training is concerned. Were just a story from a colleague, a success story, or a story of that was a significant challenge for them, or a personal story that they're trying, a challenge that they've overcome or they're struggling with. That we bond, we want to fight for each other, and as far as business colleagues, and then we also learn from each other significantly through those stories. And so Richard Branson's highly successful billionaire, but that's one of those things that he's done. They listed others like Tony Robbins and others that talk about how stories are so significant and so important to the communication process, but also the selling process that we've alluded to earlier, that's part of everybody's career and everybody's life, because we use it in all kinds of different places. So in light of that, one of the things that I thought that was interesting, I just recently had a meeting, a lunch meeting with a gentleman who represents JP Morgan Funds. And JP Morgan is one of the largest fund managers for mutual funds and investments in the world. And they come out with this quarterly report called The Guide to the Market, which is public information. Here's one of the slides from this report that they do. Put in, lots and lots of data. If I were to sit down with a client and go through all, 100 pages of this Guide to the Market, they would just be overwhelmed and like we talked about earlier, probably not come away with anything. Okay, except maybe they think in their mind, well, this guy's trying to show off, or this guy's a smart guy. Well, there's a lot of smart people in my business, so that doesn't differentiate me from 99% of everybody else who's out there. What this one slide can do, though, and this is what the conversation that I had with this gentleman from JP Morgan, what this one slide or one part of a deck can do is really help someone internalize a concept that's very important when it comes to investing. So you got a couple different things going on here on this slide, and I'll just describe it to you. On the left side, you've got returns, okay, a return y-axis. On the bottom, you've got just time, right? So you go back to 1980. Okay, so this goes from 1980 through this year. Okay, the first quarter of this year through March. And the bar, the gray bar, represents what the S&P 500 had returned as far as the performance return at the end of the year. So, for example, if we go to 1980, which is on the far left, in that year, the market at the end of the year had returned 26% to investors. So if you invested January 1st in 1980, at the end of 1980, December 31st, you had 26% more than what you had when you first invested. And then in 1981, which would be that next gray bar, beginning of the year to the end of the year, you lost 10%. Okay? And this, the bars hold true with, kind of that adage where you 3 years out of 10, you go down, and about 7 years out of 10, you go up, right? There's more bars above the line than there are below the line. But then you've got this interesting thing going on, which are these red dots. The red dots represent the lowest point that year. Okay, so the worst point during that year, intra-year. So back to 1980, far left, we ended the year up 26%, but at some point during that year, the market was down 17%. Okay, so people were pretty stressed about that, I'm sure, right? The market had gone down 17% in that year. But if they just held on, held tight, they ended up with a 26% return. Now, we know that the market over the past 60 years has given participants, the S&P 500 has given participants almost an 11% return, okay, on average. So significant return. Most recently closer to 8%, but long-term closer to 11%. So significant average returns. However, the biggest problem that people have about the market, and especially about stock investing, is the volatility, right? The fact that you have such significant ups and downs. And a lot of people will point to 2008, which you can look at on this chart and easily find because it's the worst line on the chart. It's that negative 38%, wherein in 2008, the lowest point was actually negative 49% that year, okay? And people will say, well, I can't risk that. If it goes down by that much, I'll lose, more than a third of my money. I can't invest in the market. And what we'll say is, well, it averaged 8% over the past, 30 years and 11% over the past 80 years. The market is a great place to grow your money. And they'll say, well, I don't like the volatility. And we'll say, well, volatility is just an absolute part, okay? It's an absolute part of investing. There's no way to get rid of that volatility. But if you look at this chart, give me 1 year where the market didn't have a red dot that was negative. Okay, and that forces a customer to look at across all 36 years and basically say, nope, there's a red dot on every single year, right? So every single year the market goes down, and some years goes down very big. And you say, well, if the market goes down every year, okay, every single year, and in fact, on the top of the slide it says, despite intra-year drops of an average of 14.2%, the market is still up significant part of the time and has a significant average over all those years. And the point of this slide is just to communicate to somebody that, look, it's okay if the market goes up and down during the year. We know before we ever invest in the market that that's what the market does, because we have a lot of history proving that that's what happens in the market. Okay, but the thing that I wanted to point out is how imagery can help you and how good questions can help you. Because when I was talking to this JP Morgan mutual fund manager, he was talking about the fact that they have a psychologist on staff with their fund company. And this psychologist tells, they basically are hired by JP Morgan to talk about people's why people make the decisions they do about investing. And one of the things that the psychologist says is that if you show this slide and ask somebody to report back to you how many years the market doesn't have a red number, and when they come back to you and say, actually, they have a red number every single year, that is a self-discovery situation where statistically, if they then ask those people, how do you know that? Some of them will even say that they've researched it out themselves. And of course, they didn't research it, but they did find the answer themselves based on this information that JP Morgan provided. So for the psychologist and for this JP Morgan fund manager, the point is this. If you ask the right questions, involve people in the right way verbally, you create self-discovery. And if you help guide self-discovery, you're going to create something that's more lasting, something that's internalized as far as information. So if you don't have a story, right, which is the very best way to motivate and inspire and change someone's thinking and get somebody, lend somebody some influence, which you can't always have a story for everything, right? Well, I take that back. You can have a story for everything, but you might not have the right story, right, for the right situation. And there is a time and a place for information and data. And so when it comes to information and data, you just need to ask the right questions, have people self-discover and internalize the information. And then still have the imagery as well, which is different than me just telling you. If I were to just tell you that every year the market goes up and down, you're saying, well, okay, I don't know what that means. But you can actually see on this chart, the market normally ends up, right? The gray bar is usually up. There are some years where it's down, but every year the market has a red dot, and that red dot represents significant volatility. And if you know before you ever invest in the market that it's going to have significant volatility, but if you hang tight, you're going to be fine, then you can have a consistent strategy that makes you money over time. If you don't know that, if you haven't internalized that, and then the market goes down 10% in January like it did this year, you'll get scared, you'll sell out your account and lose money. Okay, so it'll create behaviors that are destructive when it comes to investing if you don't understand or internalize the fact that the market will always go up and down, and that volatility is exactly why we get paid the significant amount that we do get paid by being investors. Anyway, just an example and an example of a conversation that I just barely had recently about the psychology of good questions and about self-discovery and interaction when it comes to communication. Good business communication requires interaction and self-discovery. Here's another image, okay? Just an example of imagery that can create understanding in a different way than me just telling somebody about the market. So over here, returns on the left side, down here, 1, 5, 10-year, and 20-year time periods. So these different segments are 1, 5, 10, and 20-year periods. Going 65 years, rolling periods over that 65-year period of time. So you've got 65 separate years, right, to look at for the 1 year, and et cetera. For stocks over the past 65 years, they averaged 11%, like we talked about before. Bonds averaged 6%, and a 50-50 portfolio averaged 8.9. Okay, so if you've got 65 years to invest, the moral of the story is that you could invest in stocks. However, a lot of people don't have 65 years. In fact, they're worried about just 1 year of investing. When it comes to 1 year of investing, you could, over that 65-year period of time, you could have lost up to 39%, and you could have gotten as much as 47%. But the moral of this slide is not that left side, it's as you move to the right. So the longer you are an investor, if you're a 5-year investor, a 10-year investor, 20-year investor, because you're investing for retirement, look over 20-year rolling periods, the worst that you would have done in a stock market portfolio is 7%. The best on average over that entire period would have been 17% during the best 20-year period. What does that say to the person who's a long-term investor? Even though the market's volatile in the short term, long term, there's actually, if we're looking at charts that are 20-year periods or even 10-year periods or even 5-year periods, there's very little volatility and very little risk, at least historically speaking, that you're going to lose your money. Okay, even though in the short term it's really bouncing around. And so visually, this is a graphic that can help people understand the longer term you are, the more risk you can take, and the better you'll be off, right? You'll be much better off by investing in stocks over the long term, over a 20-year period of time, based on these numbers, than you would in bonds or even in a moderate portfolio. Okay, so I wanted to give you an example of, and I don't know how well this will work because of the volume. I'll have to put the microphone next to it, but I wanted to show you a video clip, just a silly, I shouldn't say silly. It's really quite good. But it's one of these videos that you can just find with a quick search on YouTube, just one of these inspirational videos and there's lots of them. And I might be different than most. I'm kind of a sucker for these. I think these are really good because I think that most of us, how we act and how we communicate with others is based on how we talk to ourselves. Okay, how confident we are when we communicate with somebody else is based a lot on how we communicate with ourselves internally. So if our self-talk is positive, if it's confident, if it's assertive, if it's optimistic, if it's happy, those types of things play out in how we act around others and how we communicate with other people. And so I think, videos, and I think good books, and I think inspirational quotes, I think those kinds of things go a long ways to help us with our self-talk and help improve our situation. But I wanted to show this as an example of, I think, of a successful example of merging music, right? Most of these motivational movies will have music, they have words, they also have imagery and video that incites some emotion. And by the time you're done with it, if somebody shows you this video, you're much more likely to do something than you were before it started, as long as you're paying attention and can feel something from it. Now, there's always someone who I show this to, and they'd say something like, I don't get anything from videos like that. But I guarantee there's some form of media out there, whether it be a book, whether it be some form of music, whether it be some form of imagery, picture, quote, video, something, and you just need to find what it is for you. Something like this is trying to merge a bunch of them so that, depending on what affects you, it's gonna still have some kind of impact. For me, it's the music, it's the words, and it's the imagery. All three of those have an impact on me and influence me. I watch something like this, and after I'm done, that chemical reaction that we talked about from that podcast actually occurs, and it makes me want to accomplish something better or different or new. It inspires me to do something, right? To act. And as we've talked about before, communication that doesn't incite some form of influence to act is not effective communication. We want some form of influence to be communicated through our words, through what we're showing, what we're communicating. Okay, we want something that pricks people in a way to make them want to do something. Okay, to lend influence in a way. Okay, so let me see if I can make this work.
You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever. Because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart, even when it leads you off the well-worn path. And that will make all the difference. Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. You've got to find what you love, and that is as true for work as it is for your lovers. Your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking and don't settle. Have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. But you're going to have some ups and you're going to have some downs. Most people give up on themselves easily. You know the human spirit is powerful. There's nothing as powerful. It's hard to kill the human spirit. Anybody can feel good when they have their health, their bills to pay, they have happy relationships. Anybody can be positive then. Anybody can have a larger vision then. Anybody can have faith under those kinds of circumstances. The real challenge of growth, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, comes when you get knocked down. It takes courage to act. Part of being hungry when you've been defeated, it takes courage to start over again. Fear kills dreams. Fear kills hope. Fear put people in the hospital. Fear can age you, can hold you back from
from doing something that you know within yourself that you're capable of doing, but it will paralyze you. At the end of your feelings is nothing, but at the end of every principle is a promise. Behind your little feelings, it might not be absolutely nothing at the end of your little feelings, but behind every principle is a promise. And some of you in your life, the reason why you're not at your goal right now, because you're just all about your feelings. You're all on your feelings. You don't feel like waking up. So who does? Every day you say no to your dreams, you might be pushing your dreams back a whole 6 months, a whole year. That one single day, that one day you didn't get up could have pushed your stuff back I don't know how long. Don't allow your emotions to control you. We are emotional, but you want to begin to discipline your emotion. If you don't discipline and contain your emotions, they will use you. You want it, and you're going to go all out to have it. It's not going to be easy. When you want to change, it's not easy. If it were in fact easy, everybody would do it. But if you're serious, you'll go all out. I'm in control here. I'm not going to let this get me down. I'm not going to let this destroy me. I'm coming back. And I'll be stronger and better because of it. You have got to make a declaration that this is what you stand for. You're standing up for your dreams. You're standing up for peace of mind. You're standing up for health. Take full responsibility for your life. Accept where you are and the responsibility that you're going to take yourself where you want to go. You can decide that I'm going to live each day as if it were my last. Live your life with passion, with some pride. Decide that you're going to push yourself. The last chapter to your life has not been written yet. It doesn't matter about what happened yesterday. It doesn't matter about what happens to you. What matters is, what are you going to do about it? This year I will make this goal become a reality. I won't talk about it anymore. I can. To persevere, I think it's important for everybody. Don't give up. Don't give in. There's always an answer to everything.
All right. So hopefully that worked. Yeah, just one of those, what I think is an excellent merger of imagery and music and impactful words, quotes, words that help influence. And when you bring all that together and you think about some of those stories that some of those images are portraying, I think it does create, even if you don't feel anything, I think even subconsciously it creates that chemical reaction that we talked about from the podcast that can help us to act, that can help us to do something different, that can lend some kind of influence that creates action and desired action. If you're a leader, if you're trying to communicate to someone else what you would like them to do, for example, as a potential employee of a business, right, in an interview, you're trying to communicate to that potential employer, that HR manager, that owner, that you can bring value and you would like them to take a risk on you, which always hiring anyone is taking risk, right? We want them to take a risk on us. And the way that we communicate with them will influence whether or not they take that risk or not. And sometimes it's not going to be about how many things you wrote down on a paper. It goes back to that information overload. Most HR managers, most hiring managers, most owners can't take in a ton of information. Okay, they just want the 1, 2, or 3 things that make you memorable. And usually it's only one. When you're interviewing 20 or 50 people or even 100 people or looking at that many resumes, you're gonna make yourself memorable for maybe 1 or 2 things that you communicate through your resume or in person in that interview. And how effectively you do that and how memorable you are could be the difference of making that your job and accomplishing the job that you've always wanted, the dream career, versus having to settle for something different. So it's just so important to be able to communicate and sell ideas and lend influence based on how we communicate. We've talked a little bit about how we're always selling ourselves. We don't need to talk about that anymore. We've communicated that earlier on tonight. Examples over data. We've talked a lot about that. Stories and examples mean so much more to people than the actual information. It's the actual information. And when it comes to my career as a financial planner, there's all kinds of examples of people who are highly effective in communicating the story, the why, to people in order to influence them to act, to accomplish something that requires discipline, that requires inconvenience, that requires less consumption now for greater opportunity and for greater lifestyle opportunities later, right? So one of the primary purposes of financial planning is to convince people that if you'll take a little bit less now, so don't spend all your income, let's save some of it, or let's buy some insurances that, yeah, they have a cost associated with them. Would we rather have that money? Of course we would. All of us would rather have that extra compensation, no matter how much we earn. We'd all like to have that extra money to go do something fun now. But if as a planner I can convince somebody, if I can motivate somebody, if I can have somebody act to take a little bit less now for a significant reward down the road, okay, for the idea of a great lifestyle down the road and years of good lifestyle down the road, then they're acting in a way, and I'm lending influence in a way that accomplishes something that's very impactful and very helpful to those people. So I'm in a business where I have to sell the idea of living on less now for the opportunity to live a better lifestyle later. And that's a hard concept for a lot of people to embrace. It's something that I have to be effective as a communicator, as a communicator in business, to have them accomplish that and be motivated to accomplish that, even though it takes a little bit of discomfort now. But the same is true for a personal trainer, that is trying to help people get in shape and lose weight or get into the right kind of shape. The same is true for somebody who's trying to sell us a product. The same is true for somebody who's trying to sell, as we've talked about, themselves as a value add opportunity for an employer that's potentially going to take a risk on us individually. So all these things require some form of communication. Most of them require verbal communication. So what does all this mean? Well, I hope you'll come away with just a couple things. Stories sell. Emotion creates a chemical reaction that encourages and motivates people to do something different than they're currently doing. And everything we do when it comes to business communication has an end, right? It shouldn't just be communication for the sake of communication. We're trying to accomplish something. And it's not that we're trying to manipulate anybody. We're trying to get them to do something different or better or stop something. And all those things can be accomplished through lending influence, through effective communication. And the story, the why, is so critical to that. Our own preparation is critical to that. Having the preparation, the information, the data, not necessarily presenting all the information, not necessarily presenting all the information and data. Remember, we don't want to have a situation where we're creating information overload, but we do want to be the most prepared person in the room for whatever situation we're in. And putting a little bit of extra time and effort into thinking through how the conversation might go, thinking through responses to how, to different scenarios, doing our homework as far as the data and information that we'll need to know to have a successful, interview or successful business meeting. All that plays in to effective communication. It may not be the point, right? The point might not be to regurgitate all that information that we've done a great job studying. But if we need to fall back on it based on the interaction, based on where that conversation goes, we've got to have our preparation, because we can tell the best story in the world and somebody can poke right through that if they start to become analytical with us and start to ask us tough questions. They're going to be able to see through our lack of preparation if we haven't accomplished that. So we got to have a good story, but we've also got to have the data and information and logic behind, why it is that we're proposing what we are and trying to lend the influence that we're trying to lend. And then, so important, one of the things that we really haven't spent a lot of time on tonight, but so important, and we've alluded to this before, but the nonverbal communication issues, the details, how you look, how you act, how, what your tone is. Those types of things go such a long ways to furthering your influence. If you look unprofessional or act or talk or speak unprofessionally, there's impact that can sometimes ruin everything else that you've done so well when it comes to your communication. So pay attention to the details, pay attention to how you look, how you sound, how things feel. We want to make sure that you smell right, look right, just all those little details. And it might sound kind of silly, but we want to make sure all those details are checked off, so that the focus is that influence, right? The influence that we're trying to lend in some way to that other person. Okay. Just end with this. Art of communication is the language of leadership. The leadership, and a lot of people don't aspire to be a leader necessarily, or manager, or an owner, or something like that. And that's fine. That's beside the point. Leadership is the ability to lend influence. And the art of communication is the language of leadership. So if we want to be able to lend influence, if we want to be able to have an impact on others for good, okay, whether it be in business, relationships, religious influence, whatever it is, that influence will come from effective leadership, and effective leadership will come from the art of communication, okay? Verbal, nonverbal, but communication will lend that influence. Okay, so that's all I have for tonight. Hopefully you were able to get something from this evening and be able to get some takeaways that can help you in your career, that can help you throughout, and at least, to help you with this week's discussion board at a minimum. I hope that you just feel confident and comfortable that, putting a few slides together this week, talking about those slides, the information from these different articles that we've discussed, pretty straightforward, should be a pretty straightforward week. I hope you'll put good effort into it, and I look forward to grading, those discussions, and that those of you who have put good effort into this class should be very happy and proud of the grade that you have so far. We've got some very good grades so far, and very good participation. So we'll look forward to another good week of participation. Finish strong, get caught up, do what you need to do. If you get stuck, let me know, let me help you, and I hope everybody has a good night and a good finish to the course. Good evening.